You can dance, you can jive. This is the 34th episode of Convince Me, and we're staying alive, staying alive.
Barely.
Mamma mia, here we go again. Welcome back to another groovy episode of Convince Me. I am Andy Rutherford, joined as always by Mr. Casey Elrod, Mr. Brian Bennett. Gentlemen, are you ready for this show?
Rod, if there was any life in this show, it's gone after that intro. It's completely gone out the window. You killed it.
I like that intro. I'm jacked for this. This is probably going to be one of my favorite episodes. And I'm not just saying that this time.
He's not just saying that because
Not.
For you, our faithful listeners, something you don't know about this show, Bennett's been pushing for an ABBA show pretty much since episode 3.
ABBA versus Mike Tyson. ABBA versus the 29 New York Yankees. ABBA
Christmas came early for me.
And George Strait.
ABBA versus Abraham Lincoln. He tried to get it in there. But this week, we're going to make Bennett happy, and we hope we make you happy. We're probably not going to make my aunt happy because one of her favorite bands is being represented by Elrod. But we will get to that in just a little bit. But before we do, it is time. We need some kind of bumper for this, some kind of segue.
We need that piece of paper that Bennett used to have. That's what we need.
The weekly shield.
There we go. There it is.
It is the weekly shield. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're not, you need to be following us on all the socials. As Mr. Bennett, for those of you on Facebook and on YouTube, have for your visual stimulation. You can find us over on facebook.com/Convince Me Show. That's probably our most active account. Every Tuesday night, you're going to get a preview of every week's show at 6 o'clock Central Time before the full episode drops on Wednesday. You can also find us on Twitter at Convince Me Show. Occasionally, we get lazy and don't want to pick a poll for the week, and we let you all decide. And we need to do that again soon. I'm thinking maybe next week. This is the first time I'm springing it on these guys, so we'll see about that one. We can be found over on Instagram, Convince Me Show. As the graphic says, nothing special over on Instagram, but if you're going to follow us everywhere else, you might as well follow us there. And of course, we can be found on YouTube, tinyurl.com/Convince Me Show, where you can watch all of our episodes in their entirety in the video format. And of course, every week on Wednesday, not only does it drop on YouTube, it drops in podcast form wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Make sure you've got us like, subscribe, leave us a review, all that good stuff, and keep up with everything that we are doing. As was kind of shown tonight, it was alluded to in the open, tonight we're taking it back to a time before any of us were around. We weren't staying alive because we weren't being alive yet. But back to a groovier sort of times. We're going back to disco, and we're looking at two of the biggest disco bands, if not the two of the biggest disco bands of the era. We're looking at the Bee Gees, and we're looking, finally, Bennett can say, we're talking tonight some ABBA. Bennett and Elrod. What?
Who's that?
Yeah.
Who's that?
We're talking the Bee Gees. We're talking ABBA. It's a showdown. It's Bennett versus Elrod. This is your dance floor. Gentlemen, you should be dancing. And at the end of the show, winner takes all. So here we go. Elrod probably didn't get either of those references.
I did not. Yeah, I just think we should do a dance-off to decide who wins this.
You should be dancing. But anyway, you should have recognized that song. It's your band, dummy. Anyway,
We'll get to that.
to decide our order tonight, I'm going to need you to get your pen and paper. It's going to be another number. Closest without going over. As was heard terribly in our opening segment, in our cold open, when we talk about these two bands, a lot of times people will flow to two songs, one from each. Those are Dancing Queen and those are Stayin' Alive. Probably the biggest hit for both bands, even though it may not be their best. Bennett will probably argue it's not their best later on. But they are their two most popular. So the closest without going over, the question is this. As of 7 p.m. tonight, so an hour and 15 minutes ago on the night that we're recording, what is the combined number of Spotify streams for these two songs combined for Dancing Queen and Stayin' Alive as of an hour and 15 minutes ago?
It's a big number. I know that much.
It is the largest number we've had on this show.
Okay, I'm locked in. I'm in for the win.
Give me moments. Okay.
What we got?
21 million.
21,901,000,000.
Ooh.
Well, I'll say this. You're both short.
What?
As of an hour and 15 or so minutes ago, Dancing Queen had been streamed 466 plus million times. Stayin' Alive had been streamed 453 plus million times for a grand total of 919 million. 919,201 times.
So close.
Bennett, little short. Elrod, a lot
Way
of
short. Just a bit outside.
Maybe in the last week, those are the numbers.
You put 21 million for both. I think I've got 21 million hits just for ABBA.
No, I figured that was the amount of times you've listened to Dancing Queen, Bennett.
No, it's like Rhett said, it's not my favorite, but we'll get into that.
All right, so Mr. Bennett, will you be leading this dance or will you be closing the show?
I believe I'll close this up.
Oh.
I'll defer.
All right, Mr. Elrod, you have 2 minutes for opening statements, and those 2 minutes begin right now.
Well, they wanted the expert on disco, so you got me. I'm the definitive expert on disco. But let's talk about the Bee Gees, Rod. When you think of a great artist or band, I have 3 criteria on how I judge an artist or a band. 1, how do they sound? How does a studio sound? 2, how do they sound live? And 3, do they write their own material? Now, some people, some artists, some bands, they're good in studio or they're good live, but they don't write their own stuff. I'm here to tell you tonight, Sir Rod, the Bee Gees check each box on this. Great studio sound, excellent performers. And if you look at the Bee Gees, they're some of the most prolific songwriters of all time. At one time, the Gibb brothers had 3 out of the top 5 hits at one time and 7 out of the top 10 in the 70s. The Gibb brothers wrote every single one of their songs, and they wrote thousands of other hits for other bands, including for Kenny Rogers, Islands in the Stream. We're going to talk tonight about how Stayin' Alive is the definitive disco song. It's the most important song in disco, and it's a sound that defined the entire genre. We're going to take you all the way back tonight, and you're going to learn most of the people we've talked about, whether it's Garth or George Strait, they found stardom pretty early. It took the Bee Gees a long time, and they earned their stripes and they earned their way to the top. We're going to talk about Saturday Night Fever. I went into this not knowing a whole lot about the Bee Gees, but I came out thinking this could mean a lot of people think that they're a top 10 band of all time. And I truly believe they are. And they're certainly better than ABBA. So stay tuned.
All right. Shots fired there, Mr. Bennett. Your retort in 3, 2, 1, go.
Yeah, I'll make this opening pretty short here. When you think about ABBA, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Is it the Europop? Is it disco? Or is it Dancing Queen? Well, all these answers are correct, but ABBA is so much more than just that. What if I told you that ABBA was so huge that they dethroned the Beatles, and they did so in the UK? And what if I told you that a box office movie titled Mamma Mia would go on to nearly gross as much as the greatest movie in all time? And of course, we're talking about Forrest Gump. Both of these grossed over 600 million. And what if I told you that Mamma Mia would go on to be the longest running jukebox musical in Broadway history? ABBA is one of the greatest bands of all time. They're one of the greatest selling bands of all time. And more importantly, they're a worldwide phenomenon. And tonight, Rod, I'll convince you that ABBA is better than the Bee Gees.
All right. With like 37 seconds to spare. Getting it in there. This one is going to be a heck of a showdown on the dance floor. And if you're on Facebook, sucks for you. You're going to have to come back tomorrow. You're going to have to come back to the podcast or to YouTube, because this will do it for our Facebook preview. For those of our friends on Facebook, make sure you're checking us out on YouTube and on the podcast. For those of you smart, loyal, loving listeners and viewers on the podcast and on YouTube, we will be right back. And we are back. And I really wanted to go with Amaro Ranallo. Mamma Mia there, but I didn't. We are back. We're going to keep on dancing, and we're going to start with you, Bennett. Our first subtopic tonight, if you will, I want to know who ABBA is. Who makes up ABBA? How'd they get together? How did they be? You told me they were a big international hit. I want to know about their members. I want to know about their formation. I want to know about the ABBA breakout. And as I'm aware, there's probably a lot of information here. So I'm going to give you all 3 minutes on this topic. And Bennett, your 3 minutes start now.
Well, Rod, the ABBA story begins circa 1966 in Stockholm, Sweden, when Bjorn Ulvaeus met Benny Andersson for the very first time. Now, Bjorn was a member of the Hootenanny Singers, which was actually a very popular folk music group in Sweden. And Benny played keyboards in Sweden's biggest pop group band in the 60s called the Hepstars. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they're also often referred to as the Swedish version of the Beatles. The pair wrote their first song together just a few weeks later, and also began kind of playing occasionally with each other's bands and started recording, although it wouldn't be until 1969 when they really started recording some of their first real hits together. In the spring of that very same year, Bjorn and Benny met two women that were to become not only their fiancés, but also the other half of ABBA. And the first is Agnetha Falkstad. She was a successful solo singer herself, releasing her first single in 1967. And Bjorn would go on to marry her in July of 71. And then the fourth member of the group is Annie Frid Lyngstad, also known as Frida. She started recording her career just shortly before Agnetha did. Frida was of Norwegian origin, but she had moved to Sweden at a very early age, so we'll just go ahead and call her Swedish too. Now, Benny and Frida were an item, but they didn't really tie the knot until October of 78. So flash forward to from 1969 to 1973, and these two couples, Agnetha on vocals and Bjorn, a songwriter on the guitar, they were a couple. Then you had Benny, who was also a songwriter and on the keyboard, and Annie Frid, and she was on vocals. They would become the Swedish supergroup known as ABBA, which of course is an acronym of the first letters of their first name. Their big breakthrough came in '74 by winning the Eurovision Song Contest, which is essentially just like an international song contest. I thought of it kind of like a American Idol, kind of in a way. Their winning song was Waterloo. Interestingly, they had decided to sing this in English instead of their native tongue, which would prove to be a very beneficial move for them as it gave ABBA the chance to tour Europe and perform on major television shows. And thus the band saw many charts in many of the European countries. This was ABBA's first major hit in numerous countries. Became their first number one single in several European countries, including the UK and West Germany. It also made the top 10 in several other countries, including rising number 3 in Spain, number 4 in Australia and France, and number 7 in Canada. In the US, the song peaked at number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart, and this paved the way for their first album and the group's first trip to the United States.
All right. You cut your opening short and you went over on that one, and they pretty much evened out. So I'll allow it. Elrod, you don't get the same allowance.
Expect nothing less.
There was a whole lot to get in there.
Never mind. Moving on. What's her name? Sounds like a Austin Powers character.
That's exactly what I was going to say. So that sounds like one of those Austin Powers villains.
Was it the Agnetha Folkstog?
Yes. Yes.
So, all right, Elrod. I need you to tell me a little bit about. You told me before the show started that the Bee Gees did not get their name from Barry Gibb's initials.
Yep.
So I want you to tell me about Barry Gibb and the rest of the Bee Gees, how they got together and how they broke out. Your 3 minutes begins now.
Well, I'll get to that in a second. But the Bee Gees as a group, they're all brothers. So 2 of them are twins. The other one is older, Barry, the only still living Bee Gee. But they were formed in '58. As far as the group, they consisted of the 3 brothers. They hailed from Manchester, England. Initially, they formed a small group called the Rattlesnakes, which featured Barry on guitar and vocals, and Robin and Maurice on vocals. He comes from the Bee Gees come from a very poor family, hard times in England. They moved to Aussieland. They go to Brisbane, down under. And early in their life, the young brothers perform music to make money. That's what they had to do to make a living down there. And a local racetrack in 1960 allowed them to perform at the racetrack. And this is how they got their name. The deal was they've not paid a commission, but if fans of the racetrack threw money on the track, they got to collect that. So the owner of the racetrack went by, his last name was Good. So when you took Good and you took Barry Gibb's initials, you get Bee Gees. So there is a component to Barry Gibb, but a lot of people think that the Bee Gees are the brothers Gibb, and that's just not correct. But still, I did hold you in some suspense. It does have to do with Barry Gibb. They find some mediocre success in the early 60s. A lot of people compare them to the Beatles in terms of their sound. And they're not finding a lot of success down under. They come back to England. And they're picked up by a local producer who produced for the Beatles early in their career. And he said, in his mind, this group sounds pretty good. So what he did, he made it where he would release an album, or he would release some songs, but he would not put on there who it was. So a lot of people in England thought this was new Beatles songs, but it was actually Bee Gees. They kind of floundered for a while. They didn't find much. They had some hits, but their biggest success came in the late 60s, early 70s. One of their good friends, Eric Clapton, convinced them to come to America, to come to Miami. This is about the start of disco. And he was the one artist that really had a lot of influence on these folks. And it was a very good decision for them, because this sets up at the Bee Gees being the forerunner and also having the main song, Stayin' Alive. So they had some success pre-disco, but they didn't have nearly the success that they had with the start of disco.
Are you timing yourself?
No.
Whatever that was went off immediately when
It
my
did. I'm not timing myself. Promise.
Point
Y'all
stood up
honor.
for lying to me. Bee Gees does come from Barry Gibb.
It does. I catch you in some suspense, but it does. That is true.
You a lie.
I did lie.
And also, you thought you were going to get bonus points with me for mentioning Eric Clapton, which
I did.
in typical
No rut
fashion,
points.
No rut points for Eric Clapton because I'm still mad at Eric Clapton. And because when I saw Eric Clapton live, and the person I was with is a good friend of all of us, former roommate of myself and Mr. Bennett, Mr. Holloman, and I'll leave it at that. We saw Mr. Eric Clapton in concert, and he brought out Vince Gill, which, okay, it is what it is. And then they played Layla acoustic. And I didn't want to hear Layla acoustic. I wanted to hear Layla in the way Layla is supposed to be played. So I'm upset at Eric Clapton, and I hate Vince Gill. But that's
fighting words.
What do you got against Vince Gill?
Well, first of all, he walks around here thinking he's an eagle now. He's not.
Okay.
I mean, I guess technically he is. No, I don't. That's another show altogether. I don't hate Vince Gill. I didn't want to hear an acoustic version of Layla. But anyway, we'll continue. Elrod, before I get too far way away from this conversation, you mentioned their big hit. You mentioned Stayin' Alive. I assume you're about to talk a lot about Stayin' Alive and possibly even some other hits that you may have learned in the last 24 hours upon research topic.
That would be true. That would be very true. I will not lie about that.
So I want to hear all of your new knowledge. So due to that, I will give you 3 minutes. Tell me about the Bee Gees. Tell me about Stayin' Alive. Tell me about their biggest hit, but also their other hits starting now.
So you have to understand the time period when we talk about Stayin' Alive. They had just come off a successful live album at the start of disco, and there was a project, Saturday Night Fever, and the Bee Gees, they were the band that they wanted to include on the soundtrack. And this was truly the turning point of their career. If you look at the cultural impact of the film and the soundtrack, this really put the Bee Gees on a pathway to superstardom. Initially, the Bee Gees were not involved in the movie. John Travolta talks about how he was thinking it would be Stevie Wonder or someone else. But once the Bee Gees didn't compose all the songs on the Saturday Night Live soundtrack, but they composed and wrote the majority of them, and it's essentially one of their records. But the success of this album cannot be overstated. It's one of Rolling Stone's 500 greatest songs. Stayin' Alive is one of the greatest songs of all time, according to Rolling Stone. It would set them up for 6 consecutive #1 hits, tying the record with the Beatles at this time for most consecutive #1 hits in the United States. Stayin' Alive, when it came out, climbed the charts to #1, remaining there for 4 consecutive weeks. If you actually sit and look at the lyrics, it's kind of a depressing song. It's upbeat, but the actual lyrics are kind of depressing, and it was kind of a commentary on the time that they were living in. This is very interesting. Stayin' Alive, right, is used to train medical professionals, and it's used to train medical professionals on the correct number of chest compressions per minute when he performs CPR. I did not know this. It's actually been featured on Grey's Anatomy and The Office on how to do CPR. If you look at other hits, we'll talk about the album Saturday Night Fever in a minute, but other songs, Jive Talking, which was on one of the albums that predated Saturday Night Fever, was also a huge hit. In total, they have had, I believe, 8 #1 hits, but those Jive Talking and Stayin' Alive are above and beyond the 2 main hits that this group has.
You mentioned Office. That's a good episode when they teach you that. If you haven't seen it, go watch that episode. It's funny.
I may be incorrect in saying this, but I think literally like a few months ago, they came out and said that would no longer their recommended method.
Of course, this year sucks. They're taking away everything, right? Taking away our rights, taking away BGs. I mean, what's the world coming to these days?
Remind
What
me.
are they going to change it to? Like Baby Shark or something?
I don't remember what it was they wanted to change it to, but
Chest compression, do. Chest compression, do.
Oh man.
Have you ever watched the music video to Stayin' Alive?
I think so. Is John Travolta in it?
I don't think he is.
Then probably not. I mean,
It is hilarious. You know, after all of it, like the beats, one of it will jump out, and it's kind of spooky how they'll just appear out of nowhere. It's kind of funny.
I guarantee it is not as iconic, and Bennett's going to know what I'm talking about here, as the Rolling Stones "Start Me Up" video. Because that is music video gold.
Yeah, we watched that like in the very early version of like YouTube.
I think it was even before YouTube.
Was it before? Golly.
We watched it like 27 times in a row one night. It was fantastic. I'm going to jump off subject again here, bouncing off something you said, Elrod. Saturday Night Fever. Great John Travolta movie. Where does it rank on 70s John Travolta?
Was Grease in the 70s or 80s?
Grease was 70s. A lot of
I hate
people.
Grease. But do you know who wrote Grease? Do you know who wrote Grease? The song Grease? The Gibb. Barry Gibb.
You know who sang it? Frankie Valli.
Yep. But you don't get Frankie Valli without Barry Gibb's song. You don't get his.
Barry Gibb wishes he was Frankie Valli. We can have that debate all.
Yeah, you don't want to start this
next week.
You do not. Me and especially me. Well, Bennett's up there too. You don't disgrace the good name of Frankie Valli.
We were the youngest people in that concert by what, 40 years
at least. Me and Bennett went and saw Frankie Valli a couple of years ago, and it was fantastic. But anyway, my point I was trying to make, a lot of people rank Saturday Night Fever #1, #2. I would say it's the 4th best thing John Travolta did in the 70s. Grease is #1 because Grease is iconic, regardless of what Elrod says. Welcome Back, Kotter, while not a movie, fantastic TV show that put John Travolta on the map. And then I'm going to go with what the people can't see, but what is my name on here. Urban Cowboy was a better film than Saturday Night Fever. You've never seen either one of them, have you, Elrod?
I've seen all of them.
Yeah, okay. All right. Back on course. Bennett, you are limited to 3 minutes, not 3 hours. I know.
Okay.
Go ahead. What are you saying?
I can keep it under 3 hours. I'm going to try my best for 3 minutes. Forgive me in advance if I go a little over.
You've been talking
but
about
it
it.
has to be told. The people have to hear this.
Your 3 minutes start now.
Okay, so throughout the 70s and into, I'd say, the early 80s, ABBA absolutely dominated the globe, not only in the US, but all over the world, especially, I'd say, like in the European countries. So I handpicked some of the songs that I thought were worth mentioning. The very first one has to be Waterloo, that was in 1973. This is important in ABBA's history. This was the first single to be credited to the group performing under the name ABBA, which this song basically began ABBA's path to worldwide fame. The song shot to #1 in the UK, becoming the band's first of 9 UK #1s and the 16th biggest selling single of that year in the UK. It also topped the charts in Belgium, Denmark, Finland, West Germany, Ireland, Norway, South Africa, and Switzerland, while reaching the top 3 in Austria, France, the Netherlands, Spain, and in ABBA's native Sweden. It also reached the top 10 in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Rhodesia, and the United States. Also, this is one of my favorite ABBA songs. Second up, SOS, 1975. Bjorn Ulvaeus said that SOS was a key single in ABBA's finding its musical identity. And this is true. This was their biggest hit since Waterloo, and this really ignited their career. This song started a run of 18 consecutive top 10 hits for ABBA in the UK and Ireland. SOS reached #1 in Australia, Belgium, France, West Germany, New Zealand, and South Africa. It was top 3 in Austria, the Netherlands, Norway, Italy, Mexico, Rhodesia, and Switzerland. The song became ABBA's second top 20 hit in the United States, peaking at #15. And for a rut point, this song has been covered by the band Fozzy. And the Who guitarist Pete Townsend has said SOS is one of the best pop songs ever written. So yeah, it was a pretty big deal, and it's one of my favorites. Flash forward a little bit real quick. Super Trooper 1980, not the 2001 comedy, the song from ABBA in 1980. This song continued ABBA's run of chart success, particularly in Europe. It was ABBA's 9th #1 in the United Kingdom. This distinction placed ABBA 4th for the most UK chart toppers in history, a position the group would keep for almost 20 years. It was also the 4th biggest selling single in the UK for the year 1980. Super Trooper also topped the charts in Belgium, West Germany, Ireland, the Netherlands. It was a top 10 hit in Austria, Finland, France, Norway, Spain, Switzerland, and it's one of my favorites. 1977, Knowing Me, Knowing You. This hit was #1 in West Germany. I have a 6th consecutive #1 there, as well as United Kingdom, Ireland, Mexico, and South Africa. It reached #3 in Austria, Belgium, Netherlands, and Switzerland. It was a top 10 hit in Australia, Canada, France, New Zealand, and Norway. In the US, it became a 6th top 20 single, peaking at #14. This song is it's kind of a darker theme song for the band. It kind of details a breakup between a couple, which is actually kind of a really creepy omen for them because both of these couples actually did get divorced. So it's kind of weird thinking that they were singing this song, and, and in the future they both of them were to split up. And of all the ABBA songs, this was probably my absolute favorite. I'm gonna skip ahead because I'm running out of time. I'm way over time.
You're going.
Take a Chance on Me, 1978. Billboard magazine described Take a Chance on Me as their most busy, fast-paced production. It became the group's 7th UK #1, and it gave the group the distinction of being the act with the most chart-topping singles in the 1970s in the UK. It sold over 500,000 copies and was awarded a gold disc. In the US, it reached #3 and was certified gold in sales. And it peaked #3 in Canada and Germany. And it's one of my favorites. And last but not least, real quick, Dancing Queen, 1976. This is by far the most well-known and popular track. It's a worldwide hit. Everybody knows it. It became their only number one hit in the U.S. though, surprisingly. Not going to talk about all the charts that it topped. Basically, it topped the charts in like every country possible. I could probably spend 5 minutes going over all the countries that it charted in, but it ranked number 174 on Rollins' 2004 list of the 500 greatest songs of all time. That same year, it made VH1's 100 greatest dance songs in rock and roll. Also in 2000, editors of Rolling Stones compiled a list of the best 100 pop songs. Dancing Queen placed number 12 among songs in the 70s. In closing, in 2015, the song was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame, and to date, the music video on YouTube has over 459 million views. So it's a pretty popular song, not one of my favorites. Like I was telling Rudd before, it's kind of like Smells Like Teen Spirit for Nirvana. Their biggest hit, but for me, you've heard it so much. You just like, there's so much better out there.
Two things.
Only time in history that ABBA and Nirvana have been spoken in the same sentence.
Not necessarily true. Dave Grohl's an ABBA fan.
Yeah.
So, two things.
Check our Facebook.
Two things. Number one, I don't know what was further off. Elrod's guess on total numbers of streams or Bennett hitting 3 minutes. Both were well off.
Oh, man. I cut half of that out, too.
Second thing is, if we are basing this off the charts in Rhodesia, then the Bee Gees are...
I'm screwed. Yeah.
So,
isn't it like a steakhouse?
Rhodesia?
You're thinking of Rhodesios.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of.
No, that's a Brazilian steakhouse.
It's close. It's close.
No, it was not close. But anyway, moving along. 2 minutes. Bennett, tell me about some of ABBA's records. 2 minutes. Go.
Okay. In order to do this in 2 minutes, I'm just going to talk about one record, and that's their biggest record. And if we're strictly talking about studio albums, it has to be the album Arrival, which came out October 11th, 1976. This was ABBA's fourth studio album, and it was their first to hit number one. And it became like a major seller all over the world. I found the title of this actually very fitting to ABBA because it really was like their big arrival onto the music scene on a worldwide scale. It became the top selling album of 1977 in both UK and West Germany. And it spent a longer time on the charts than any other of the ABBA's albums. They've had 8 albums. Largely in part because it houses 2 number 1 hits with Knowing Me, Knowing You and Dancing Queen. Plus it had a number 3 hit that gets overshadowed, Money, Money, Money. And depending on which part of the world you lived in at the time, it also included a 4th hit, Fernando. Really top to bottom, it's a really solid album. And it was included in the 1001 albums you must hear before you die. The album went double platinum in 2 countries, it went platinum in 4 countries, and went gold in another 6 countries, making it truly a worldwide success. And to me, this album right here was truly ABBA at their very best. So, Arrival.
All right. Brought that one in under time. Good job. All right. Tell me about the Brothers Gibb. And
don't say that.
Right.
That's not their name.
You've got 2 minutes on Bee Gees records now.
Well, I'm going to talk about 2. And this is kind of like my Rocky spiel here. Remember that Rocky. Saturday Night Fever. Even though it's a soundtrack, it's pretty much a Bee Gees album. If you look at top to bottom, if you look at Saturday Night Fever, it is the best-selling album of all time. soundtrack album. It is the only soundtrack to win the Grammy for Best Album. Also, you cannot understate how much this album had as far as the culture of disco in the United States. You've got Stayin' Alive, but even more so than that, you've got Night Fever, How Deep Is Your Love, More Than a Woman, If I Can't Have You. All these are Bee Gees songs. You Should Be Dancing. And also, this album re-released Jive Talkin', which had been released in the album that predated Saturday Night Fever. It, as stated, won Grammy of the Year, only disco album to win a Grammy as well. It's on Rolling Stone's list of 500 greatest albums of all time. It's at 132. It sold millions of albums. We're going to talk in a minute about one thing that's come up in our previous shows about artists and bands is, especially the Garth and George Strait episode, right, is this notion of who's got more hits or who has sold more records. Both of these artists, there's 100 million album discrepancy with both of them. Had they sold 100 million albums or have they sold 200 million albums? It applies to both of them. How can they be that far off? Someone had one job and they can't do it. The other record I'll talk about is Main Course. This was the first Bee Gees disco album. It predated Saturday Night Fever. It also had hits such as Baby As You Turn Me Away, Songbird, all of them, All This Making Love, Edge of the Universe. All these songs were very different in the way they sounded, and just goes to show how this band has a range. It could be a sad song, or it can be a groovy song where you kind of dancing around. It can be that. Did you like that? I told you I was going to be dancing in this episode. So Main Course and Saturday Night Fever are the two main records that the Bee Gees have.
Look at you. All this new knowledge going over time.
About that.
You know what, Elrod? You should be dancing.
I should.
Hey, you got the reference. I'm impressed. But keep on dancing, my friend, as we are going to move on to our next topic. 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Tell me about the Bee Gees' impact on pop culture, starting now.
They're singularly responsible for the explosion of the disco movement. In the late 70s, early 80s, it was all about disco. And it was primarily responsible when you look at Stayin' Alive. But if you look at the other songs that other people had during this time, the Bee Gees are responsible for these songs in terms of the songwriting. The Gibb brothers placed 13 singles on the Hot 100 in 1978 while making 12 in the top 40. Singer Gavin DeGraw had talked about the influence of the Bee Gees in the 70s, and he said this. He said, "This is an iconic group. It's not just one great band, but it's a great group of songwriters. Even after the Bee Gees' success on the pop charts, they're still writing songs for other people, and these are huge hits. Their talent went far beyond the normal pop success." So when you look at the Bee Gees, you look at their impact they had on the disco movement, but it just wasn't them. It was the songs that they were writing for other people. So you could look at the Bee Gees and say, you know what, this band right here is responsible for disco in this country exploding during this time.
Another root point lost by mentioning Gavin DeGraw. Do you know who his fiance is?
Gavin DeGraw. I do not. I could probably Google that.
Never mind. I'm mixing him and Ryan Cabrera. Either way, they're interchangeable. Ryan Cabrera is engaged to Alexa Bliss, and therefore I hate him. But moving on.
What about Melky Cabrera?
Don't mention that name. Don't mention that name.
He had a great career, and then he went to Atlanta. Bennett, tell me about ABBA's impact on pop culture. 2 minutes starting now.
Six minutes.
2 minutes.
Oh, 2 minutes. Oh, okay. So I'll try to do this in 2 minutes. By the time ABBA had disbanded in 1982, they had already pretty much safely secured their spot as music icons. Had their story ended just right there, um, we would still be praising them today as one of the best pop bands of all time, best disco bands of all time. But their story didn't end there. A decade later, they would find themselves thrust back into the spotlight in pop culture. In 1992, they released a compilation album, ABBA Gold, the greatest hits, which really launched ABBA right back into the listening charts. With sales of 30 million, Gold is the best-selling ABBA album. The music and influence of ABBA continued to infiltrate other realms of pop culture during the 90s. There was two successful Australian films released in 94, The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and Morel's Wedding, both of which prominently feature ABBA songs on their soundtracks, which of course garner sales. In 1999, Mamma Mia, the musical, burst onto the scene and became Broadway's seventh longest running show in history and the longest running jukebox musical of all time, topping musicals such as Jersey Boys, for example. Mamma Mia proved to be such a popular musical around the world that it has spawned a 2008 film adaptation, Mamma Mia, which was a box office hit and grossed 615 million worldwide. 10 years later, a sequel was released, Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again, and this one grossed a cool 395 million. It boasts a 79% on Rotten Tomatoes, proving that its appreciation for both critics and fans, which is really truly a testament to the enduring relevance of ABBA.
Very good. Very good. Bennett, our last subtopic here before we get into closing arguments. What is, in 2 minutes, ABBA's legacy? Starting now.
ABBA truly are trailblazers. This quartet from Sweden became the first group from a non-English speaking country to achieve success globally, specifically here in the US and in the UK, topping charts worldwide from 74 through 82. They really set the blueprint for other artists to follow in their footsteps and prove that you can achieve global success musically no matter where your origins may lie. ABBA is regarded as one of the all-time greatest pop music acts. Sure, one reason is the multiple chart-topping hits during their recording time, but I also believe it was their ability to stay, relevant nearly 40 years after disbanding, which really is really incredible in my eyes. You have to consider the albums, millions and millions sold worldwide. Think of the cover bands, most notably the A-Teens in the early 2000s, if y'all remember the A-Teens. There's been prominent artists like Cher who've covered their songs. You've got the Broadway musical, that's one of the longest, most popular musicals in history. You got the two theatrical musicals that have combined to gross over $1 billion. Think of the 12.3 million monthly listeners just on Spotify alone, I being one of them, of course. Even today, in 2020, ABBA have 5 new songs reportedly in the works, and they're slated for a 2021 reunion. They're supposed to release these new songs depending on the situation we have with the current pandemic. But for me, 2 words to describe ABBA's legacy would be trailblazers and enduring.
Nice. Elrod, what's the Bee Gees' legacy? 2 minutes, starting now.
Well, the Bee Gees' legacy is just when you look at the statistics of what they accomplished, it's amazing. Of course, they had 9 singles that reached #1 on the Hot 100 chart, but they had 20 on the top. They had 20 #1 singles on the Hot 100 chart as well. They've got their Hollywood Walk of Fame star. They've got Barry. It has been knighted by the Queen of England. Um, the knock on the Bee Gees was always this: they're a Beatles knockoff, and in terms of their early years, they're just a Beatles knockoff. I found a great quote from John Lennon when he was asked about the Bee Gees. And here's what he said. He said, try to tell the kids in the 70s who were screaming to the Bee Gees that their music was just the Beatles. He says, there's nothing wrong with the Bee Gees. They did a great job. There's just nothing else going on, man. So in terms of this criticism that you'll see from people about the Bee Gees and the Beatles, it doesn't hold water. They had their own success with their own songs. They had a far-reaching success with songwriting. It is truly wrote thousands of songs for other people. And that's truly amazing. Some artists will have people write songs for them, and they'll also dabble and write some songs themselves. They did it all themselves. They performed the music, they wrote the music, and they're basically a modern day Toby Keith, how he writes all of his stuff. They would be very wealthy if all of them were allowed today off the royalties and everything. But if you look, they had a #1 hit in 4 different decades in terms of performance, in terms of their songwriting. So their musical taste never got stale. It survived for over 40 years in different eras. So it just showcase to what people out in the 60s, in the 50s, this band was not anything like they were in the 70s. So they were able to adapt to what was popular at the time, and like them, and they did it.
All right. First of all, that may be the first, last, and only time we've heard the Bee Gees compared to Toby Keith.
But Toby Keith writes all of his stuff, and that's the reason why he's always #1 in terms of highest paid artists, because he gets royalties from writing the song and also the performance, and it's the same thing with the Bee Gees.
And number 2, I really thought the John Lennon quote was going to be "No possessions."
No religion too?
Easy.
Could have got a Forrest Gump reference then.
Nope. We haven't done one of these in a while, but we're going to do it tonight. I have a follow-up question. We're going to see how Elrod's knowledge is, but
Oh God.
1 minute to answer this question. Elrod,
Mm-hmm.
Stayin' Alive is what everybody thinks of when they think of the Bee Gees. If you were trying to turn someone on to the Bee Gees, what one song that is not Stayin' Alive would you point them to? 1 minute. And why?
Well, if Stayin' Alive is not the song, I'm probably going to go back to the album that predated the one that was just right before Starting Night Fever, and go to Jive Talking. This also has a great music video. If you go, this group had very unique music videos. So if I'm going to try to get a modern day person into the Bee Gees, I want to show them something visual. I want to show them the music video for Jive Talking.
All right. 30 seconds. Good job. Bennett, 1 minute. But same
In
question.
only 1 minute.
But same question. If you're going to turn somebody on to ABBA, not Dancing Queen, what song and why?
I think you'd have to go with SOS that came out in 1975. Like I said, this was when they really started finding their musical identity. They had just had a big hit in Waterloo 2 years earlier, but other than that, they didn't really have anything that would just really just shouted, "This is ABBA, this is what they are." My man Benny on the keyboard absolutely kills it on this song. Go back and watch, just listen to the song or watch the YouTube video of him on that keyboard. Man, he's just pounding on that keyboard on this song. It was a pretty popular song pretty much throughout the entire world. And it's one of my favorite songs too. It's probably Yeah, I'd say it's probably my favorite song. So if I had to put somebody on ABBA other than Dancing Queen, I'd point them in the direction of SOS.
Good deal, gentlemen. Well, these have been fantastic arguments. One from somebody that has been well versed in the topic for many years, another from somebody who's been well versed in the topic for many hours. Um, but both very well put together arguments. Mr. Elrod, in closing, why are the Bee Gees better than ABBA, thinking of Jessica Alba for some reason.
Why are the Bee Gees better than Jessica Alba? Go.
There we go.
Why are the Bee Gees better than ABBA? Your closing statement, 2 minutes, go.
We'll throw some names at you, Sir Rutt. Michael Bublé, Eric Clapton, Destiny's Child, Celine Dion, the Gatlin Brothers, Al Green, Elton John, Tom Jones, Janis Joplin, Olivia Newton-John, Dolly Parton, Elvis Presley, Kenny Rogers, Diana Ross, Rob Stewart, Barbara Streisand, Conway Twitty, Frankie Valli. What do they all have in common? Other than just a bunch of random names as far as musical artists, I just said. They all say that one of the biggest influences they had in them wanting to be an artist in terms of their musical style was the Bee Gees. All of them point to the Bee Gees as part of their sound in one way or another. I did not know this, but Barry Gibb had a huge influence in Grease. There's a lot of talk going into making the movie. Is this really 50s sounds? This doesn't sound like anything in the 50s. They used Grease. They used Barry Gibb's song. It was a huge success. The Bee Gees, right, are a transcendent talent. They were able to change from the 50s to the 60s to the modern age. They were able to write over 1,000 songs. This is a very close race between ABBA and the Bee Gees on the music in terms of what they put out individually. But when you look as a whole on what they did, the hundreds of millions of records that they sold, if you look at the impact that they have, I think that the Bee Gees come out on top because Stayin' Alive is bigger than Dancing Queen in terms of the impact, in terms of the amount of records sold. And the lasting impact is going to be the Bee Gees as the songwriters. And that's what puts the Bee Gees over the top by a little bit, just because it was thousands of songs they cranked out. I mean, some artists will write 10 or 15 songs in a lifetime. They wrote thousands of songs. So when you look at everything as a whole, the one thing that puts the Bee Gees over the top is their ability to write the songs when everything else is equal.
Bennett, why is ABBA better than the Bee Gees? 2 minutes, go.
ABBA sent 20 songs into the Billboard Hot 100. The group achieved 18 consecutive top 10 singles and a total of 9 number ones, including Dancing Queen, of course, as their biggest success. Let's take a minute and talk about ABBA Gold. It's by far their best-selling album, as well as it's the 23rd best-selling album worldwide. In 2013, ABBA's Gold album overtook the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band to become UK's second biggest selling album of all time. In 2019, the same record, ABBA Gold, passed its 900th week on the UK official albums chart, making it the longest running top 100 album of all time. The group was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2010. Not bad for a pop disco group. They've been a huge success on the charts. They are a huge influence on Broadway, a huge influence at the box office. People of all ages from all walks of life throughout the world have enjoyed the sounds of ABBA for the last 5 decades. And to me, that surely makes them one of the biggest, most influential, and greatest bands of all time. And Rut, I will leave you with this. Knowing me, knowing you, the way old friends do, you may be a little torn on who to pick here tonight. But gimme, gimme, gimme a minute to plead my case. Be a super trooper and take a chance on me. Me and I are head over heels for ABBA. I still have faith in you that when all is said and done, ABBA will be awarded the winner here tonight. Watch out, because the winner takes it all. I mean, after all, that is the name of the game. And tonight, ABBA should be your winner. And so, on behalf of myself, to ABBA, thank you for the music.
Bravo. Bravo.
I spent a long time on that.
Pandering to the judge. I love it. I love it.
All right. So here's my little diatribe here before I announce our winner, and the winner does take it all. If we're talking about me coming into this show, am I a particularly big ABBA fan? No. Am I a particularly big Bee Gees fan? Also no. But I absolutely respect both bands and what they've done, and I think they both deserve all the accolades they've got. I think they are both transcendent, I believe is the word Elrod used. Both of them fall into that. And I take absolutely nothing away from the talent of anybody. When we look at the Bee Gees, the just musical talent, the lyrically genius, the musically genius that the Bee Gees had, and as Elrod has pointed out, not only for themselves, for so many other people, the way they've transcended just music. I mean, there was a lot to do with Saturday Night Fever. They wrote the song Grease that Frankie Valli performed greatly, better than Barry Gibb ever could, but Barry Gibb wrote it. Okay. So you've got me pissed off on this Frankie Valli shade you've been throwing, but you know, it is what it is. I do love me some Frankie Valli. All that is great, and ABBA can't. I don't think ABBA can boast that, as far as I don't think they're on that same level as Barry Gibb. But what ABBA can say that Barry Gibb can't say, the Bee Gees can't say. I'm not just meaning to single out Barry here, although he is, you know, the main one you think of when you think of the Bee Gees. The way ABBA hit, you know, a lot of times a band hits and they're fantastic. Everybody in America loves them, and it's a big deal if they chart in another country. We hear people all the time, oh, they're huge in England and nobody in America has ever heard of them. We have those bands all the time. ABBA was huge everywhere. Even freaking Rhodesia, for crying out loud, as we've
And
learned.
that steakhouse down there in Nashville, they were great.
Really big in Sheboygan.
They're huge in Sheboygan. They inspired Rhodesio Steakhouse, apparently.
If I had known that this episode night was going to be who is more popular in the Brazilian steakhouse in Nashville, you know what? I would have went another way with this.
Maybe for another time.
But literally, ABBA was a worldwide sensation. And that's not to say the Bee Gees weren't big other places, because they were. They had a big, I mean, they were from the UK. They had a big UK following, but they probably only were like hit 3 or 4 on the charts in Rhodesia. So I think ABBA, as far as widespread, had a bigger impact. I think ABBA has had a longer impact. And a lot of that may be
because 2 of the Gibb brothers are dead.
Well, and that's absolutely true.
One from one died of cancer, I believe, or one had really bad health problems. And one, you need to go watch the interview that Barry Gibb gave about a year ago. It's really sad. They had a really close bond, those three guys. And he talked about how when he lost each of his brothers, that was really the only time in his life that they were mad at one another, was when he lost two of his brothers. So it's a really sad interview, but yeah, uh, he's lost two. He was the oldest brother, and he's also the last surviving brother of the Gibb brothers.
That is indeed sad.
Depressing. I had to
Okay.
put a coat blanket because I know a loss is coming, so I had to throw a coat blanket on
bringing
it.
the show down a notch. Appreciate that. But anyway, as I was saying, I believe ABBA has been longer. A lot of that due to Mamma Mia, the musical and the movies, which maybe they shouldn't get credited for because they didn't make the movie, they didn't make the musical. But the fact is, somebody thought their music was a big enough deal to make that. Um,
And Beanie and Bjorn are making a lot of money off of these because they wrote every single ABBA song.
there we
So
go.
anytime those words come out of their mouth, it's just cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching.
But I think as far as pure talent, I go Bee Gees. I think as far reaching and far reaching physically across the world and far reaching in time, I go with ABBA. Here is what puts me over the top. When you think Bee Gees, you think Stayin' Alive. When you think ABBA, you think Dancing Queen. And if we're looking at those two songs, I'm going Stayin' Alive because Dancing Queen gets on my nerves. But when we look past Stayin' Alive with the Bee Gees, as far as songs they put out,
They had more number one hits.
Do what?
And they had more number one hits. That's
Not in
gotta mean
Rhodesia.
they had 9 number ones. ABBA had 1 number one hit in the U.S. chart.
In the
One.
U.S.
One.
Yes, but here's the thing. I'm not looking at charts. I'm looking.
Oh, okay. I'm going to bookmark this right here. Right on 12/7 for our next musical episode. It says he does not look at charts. We're going to revisit this.
I'm not
I
talking
promise.
about charts. I'm
We're
talking.
going to revisit this.
Here's what I'm
On a
talking.
worldwide scale.
We're going to revisit this. I'm going to bookmark it. 9:20,
Anyway.
12/7.
You're not helping your cause. Anyway, when I look past, as far as impact today, songs people know today, and maybe this isn't a fair assessment, but it's my assessment. When I look past Stayin' Alive, there's not a lot there for the Bee Gees for me that have lasted. Obviously, they were big at the time. They went number one at the time. Cool. When I look past Dancing Queen, which I try to do, when I look past Dancing Queen, there are other songs there for ABBA. And maybe that's because of the musical. Maybe that's because of the recency bias. Because you do hear those more. They are more relevant now due to Broadway, due to the movies. But I think when you factor in that, you factor in ABBA's far more reaching. If we're going more talented, I give it to the Bee Gees. But if we're going bigger, I'm going to go ABBA.
Right, with the commercial impact over the talent. It never ceases to disappoint me.
You know, maybe, I don't know. I mean, I think the talent of ABBA, okay, maybe not to that scale, but I think all four of them standing alone were very talented on their own. You know, you had what, Benny and Bjorn and these big, huge hootenanny band, and the other one that was considered the Swedish form of the Beatles, which I thought was kind of funny, but I don't know. Just something about when all four of them came together. It was magic.
Only when we're talking about ABBA can I give Bennett the win, and he's still kind of low-key offended because I called the Bee Gees more talented.
Yeah, hurts my feelings.
Mm.
You know, though, but I'm gonna have to give this a top 5 episode for our show. Probably one of my favorites. You know,
Not your
only
favorite, but one of the favorites.
one of the favorites. Um, Researching it, you know, was really tough. I had to watch the YouTube videos. I had to do the musicals. I had to play my ABBA sound list on my Spotify. It's terrible. It was rough. It was rough.
Rut wouldn't be able to rate our top shows because in his mind charts don't matter. So
That's not what I said. That's not what I said. ABBA have more songs on the chart worldwide, not just Rhodesia, but other places.
yeah, I mean Rhodesia. Yeah, that's what we're going by. Okay.
ABBA had 9 #1 hits as well. Just only one in the U.S.
Where it matters.
Oh,
Where it matters. America.
America. This is America.
Uh,
All right,
Great show. Great show.
ladies and gentlemen, I will say this. Look on our socials because I'm making a call, an executive decision on behalf of this show. Bennett's got your graphic there. Look at
still
Facebook.
watching.
Look at Instagram to get the heads up. But at some point later in this week, go to Twitter. Next week, I'm making the executive decision to let you all pick again. What the 4 options are going to be, I don't know yet. But there's going to be a poll this week, and you all are going to pick what it is. So be on the lookout for that this week.
You know, I just realized something.
What's that?
I think we went with ABBA versus Bee Gees this week, so I would quit talking about ABBA and we can move forward with the show.
I mean, if we're going
Finally
to be
get it.
completely transparent here, we were late getting together this week for a show idea. I jokingly said something about ABBA because Bennett has said something about ABBA every single week since week 3, and nobody came up with anything else. And Elrod didn't want to take the Bee Gees, and I said, well, you come up with another topic, and he couldn't. So here we are, ABBA and the Bee Gees.
ABBA versus
Finally
Playwalker
over.
next week. I'm calling it.
How about Frankie Valli versus anybody?
Who?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Elrod will not be joining us next week because he's been fired from the show for slanderous comments. But anyway, congrats to Bennett. Bennett, you have convinced me. ABBA over the Bee Gees. Either of you have any closing statements before we shut this thing down?
Charts don't matter.
One of my favorite shows.
And that's all we got to say about that. Look for Twitter. We might get you a poll this week if we can decide what 4 topics we want in the next day or 2. Otherwise than that, guys, be here next week. We'll have another show. Don't know what it'll be yet. Maybe you'll get to pick it. For Mr. Bennett, for Mr. Elrod, I'm Andy Rutherford. And until next time, we bid you adieu. Peace.